All right, welcome along to the RT Soccer Podcast. Raf Diallo here. We have lots to get through today, including looking ahead to Ireland's double header of fixtures against France and the Netherlands, the end of Vera Pauw's tenure as Republic of Ireland women's manager, and then a bit of League of Ireland and the Champions League draw as well. I'll be joined by former Republic of Ireland women's manager Sue Ronan a little bit later on, but right now I'm joined today by former UCD, Sheffield Wednesday and Shamrock Rovers midfielder Paul Corry and the 42.ie journalist David Sneyd. Lads, hope you're both keeping well.
Cheers, Raf.
Thanks, Raf. All good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad now. Not too bad. And we're straight into a pretty busy period for the senior men's team. Of course, live coverage of Ireland against France at 7 p.m. Thursday. That's RT2, RT Player, and then RT2 FM's Game On, and then also on rt.ie/sport as well. And then, of course, Sunday, it'll be the turn of the Netherlands, and that will also be all live on across RT platforms. But before we start on that, we have to talk about Evan Ferguson's goals at the weekend against Newcastle. So not often a young 18-year-old Irish player scores a hat-trick, Paul, and you look at the goals: a poacher's finish, a thunderbolt, and then that deflected strike. The first goal, arguably though, is probably the more important in terms of the type of goals. If he's going to become a regular goal scorer, they're the ones he's going to be snaffling up a fair bit.
Yeah, they're the ones you're correct in saying, Raf, that I guess the strikers who consistently hit that kind of 20 goal a season mark seem to be cleaning up on, and it's an instinct that you can't really teach to players. It's just one where you kind of sniff out where the potential opportunity lies. And I mean, he was so quickly onto it and put it away very well. But I mean, each of the goals had something different about it. Like the second where he's able to get a turn on Dan Burn and just guide the ball into the corner, and then the other one off his left. There's just so much to his game. I know, like, probably for the last 6 months, we've been a bit tentative about bigging him up and putting too much pressure on his shoulders. But we're at a situation now whereby you can almost sit back, relax, and just watch this career take off, because he has so much to his game that there's no doubt that he's going to be a top Premier League striker. You were talking about Newcastle had the best defensive record with Man City last year in the Premier League, and he gave them so many troubles. Just so much to his game, Raf, in general. I know the goals are the ones that we obviously look at, and as a striker, you'll be measured against that. But I just think his hold-up play, his ability to turn on the ball, his ability to run in behind, he has absolutely everything to his game that you would want from a top Premier League striker. And I have no doubt that this guy is going to go on and have a fantastic career in the Premier League. And I'm sure there's a number of people down in Dalymount Park starting to punch the numbers about what this next transfer fee could be worth. But he's in a perfect position right now with De Zerbi and Brighton, and the way they progress and develop players. The environment is perfect for him, and I'm sure if he continues on that trajectory, there's going to be a big move for him, whether it be in 12, 24 months' time, and Evan's going to have a top career at the very highest level.
Yeah, so he's only the fourth 18-year-old to score a Premier League hat-trick, and in terms of Irish players who've scored hat-tricks in the Premier League, the last one was Jonathan Walters a few years back. And David, I mean, De Zerbi has generally been trying to keep his feet on the ground. Not that Evan needs that, because given his demeanour, he seems like somebody who's really, really grounded. Obviously has a great entourage around him, led by his family. But De Zerbi was comparing him to like a right-footed Christian Vieri. Anybody who's old enough to remember Christian Vieri will know that was one hell of a player. I don't know if that's the most accurate comparison. I've seen others in general, but then James Milner as well. In the Athletic were reporting his comments afterwards that Evan set the tempo early on. He closed down and blocked the ball going forward. That might seem a minor thing looking at the game overall, but it sets a tempo. It shows his intent without the ball. And anyone who knows him so far in his young career, he's an unbelievable finisher. He's a goal scorer, and when he's doing the ugly side of the game too, and being the first line defense, he was outstanding. He's still so young, but what a player for us, and the ceiling is very high for him. So as Paul said, David, I mean, the goals are what everyone's going to talk about. I mean, not everyone scores a hat-trick every week, not even Messi and Ronaldo, but he fits into the modern game in terms of his style as well.
Yeah, well, it's one of them where he's just an intelligent footballer. He's smart, and even that comment that James Milner made there, like, it is so true. It's because like everything matters in a match. You know what I mean? Like, those little things all add up. And if you see your young striker who's not just happy to stay between the 18-yard box and wait for his chance, and actually setting that tempo, that is like so important. As you say, it's the modern striker you look at. He spoke about it, and I think it was the BBC Football Focus interview, when he was talking about, say, bits of Harry Kane's game and all the rest, where you have to drop it a little bit deeper. And obviously the system that obviously De Zerbi will play and what he demands of his players, you're not going to get away with just being that striker who maybe makes runs in behind all the time and just does that one-dimensional stuff. Like, he is having to learn, and he is, let's be honest, like, and the point Paul made earlier is so true. Like I was saying it last year, where it's like when he was scoring a few goals, and like I saw that stat, we could retweet it from up to like about the goal involvements, and like only Cesc Fabregas at the same amount at the same age, and that kind of gives you an indication, not just the goals, but obviously getting involved with goals of what's being demanded of him. And like last year, you're kind of thinking, right, like it wasn't even a full season. You forget, like he only really came in once De Zerbi came into the job, and like I remember speaking to him, he was doing a gig for the FAI out in the school in Finglas, and it was just after he'd made his debut and for Ireland. And the talk was, like January, you might be going out on loan, and that's probably going to be what was needed. I think Sheffield United might have been one of the clubs, or Middlesbrough. There was definitely a couple of clubs who are kind of going for promotion. Like, and he was even saying then, if that's what's best, if that's what's needed, that's what I'll go and do. So, and then he's gotten his chance and he's taken it. And like the second goal, one of the things that stands out is just he has that little look, and I think he realizes, because it is Dan Burn and it's not Shard, he kind of realizes, right, he's going to drop off, so I can just turn here. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's those little bits of awareness and kind of a decision you make maybe in your head that gives you that time to know, right, it's not going to be the more aggressive front-footed defender who's going to be coming right at me. It's going to be the fella who hasn't got pace and is going to want to drop off and isn't going to want to get spun and torn straight away. Like, that little bit of awareness buys in the time. And then the finish, it's just incredible. Like, because it's not even, do you know what, it kind of actually reminds me of a few of the goals that Lauren James scored during the World Cup, where he doesn't have to absolutely smash it and blame it and think, right, I'm going to just try and smash it as hard as I can, hit the target. The way he kind of puts his foot through it and just caresses it and guides it, has got the power, obviously, to go in, but it's just arrowed in. Like, it's just so controlled, and that kind of just control and that kind of awareness just kind of sums up all different parts of his game. Like, although there was one moment in the in the first half, where Brighton broke and he just plays a pass. I can't remember who it was, just behind his teammate, and you're kind of thinking, if you're being overly critical, you're kind of thinking, if he just plays that pass a yard in front, but sure, he's already scored by that point, and then he puts in the performance that he does in the second half. But that's probably now where, because you listen to Billy Gilmore talking afterwards about what De Zerbi demands. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the clips of De Zerbi, I know obviously he's on international duty, so he probably wasn't in the next day, but like, when he comes back, wouldn't be surprised if one of those clips of that counter-attack where he plays the pass just a couple of yards behind, rather than, and it kind of kills the momentum of the move a small bit. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what he's getting shown when he gets back. Or hopefully he may be getting shown a couple of clips of his goals against France and the Netherlands. Hopefully we'll see how that goes.
And speaking of France and the Netherlands, obviously Stephen Kenny is building towards that. Now, the squad was named last Thursday. I was at the squad announcement, and before the press conference had a chance to chat to Stephen just in general about the squad selection itself, but also the task at hand. And in this clip, Stephen Kenny is discussing the task at hand.
The reality is, we were disappointed to lose in Greece. There's no doubt about that. To lose 2-1 in Greece, I think obviously we came back and got a home victory against Gibraltar. But from our point of view, we're just one big victory away from the table having a completely different dimension and a different, one big victory, playing two of the best teams in Europe, two of the highest ranked teams in Europe, France possibly the best team in the world, and they've been in the last two World Cup finals. Holland, very highly ranked, are actually the number one seeds, believe it or not. So it's a big week, great games, playing France and Paris on Thursday, Dublin here, this will be sold out 50,000, and it'll be real two special nights, and we're looking for that big result, and we've not been far away against the top teams. All the games have been very, very tight, from Portugal drawing here and losing in the last minute, and Ukraine drawing out there, Scotland, we swapped victories, and also France here, so the games, we've never been beaten by more than a goal. They've always been very, very tight games, and France have the capacity. France beat Holland 4-0, so they have the capacity to hammer anybody on their night. But we've got to show show our level of organisation and strong performance in Paris, and bring that in here, then have a big night, a special night here against Holland, who are, they have a lot of world-class players also. So it's a big challenge and one that we're looking forward to.
All right, so that is Stephen Kenny there chatting to myself at the Aviva Stadium just after he had announced his squad. And Paul, I mean, he's right in terms of a victory in either of these games against France or the Netherlands would throw the group wide open again. And also, I suppose he's also correct in the sense of, I suppose, June being particularly costly, and it does throw it in light relief because I guess you're coming into this September window against two of the best teams in the world, really needing to pick up 3 points in one of them, and you're leaving yourself with very little margin for error.
Yeah, and we're in this position, Raf, because the result against Greece out in Greece. And it's very hard to get away from the performance on the night. It was very poor. It was a notch below what we had shown in maybe previous games, particularly the French game in Dublin, where we ran them quite close. But I'm worried going into these fixtures, to be honest with you. I think, when we met France, there was almost a bit of a hangover from the World Cup. They'd beaten Netherlands quite convincingly at home, and it felt like they just wanted to get out of Dublin with 3 points, and they managed to do that through Pavard's goal. But I just find it hard to get away from that Greek performance and how lackluster it was, and how there seemed to be so little connect between, say, what we're trying to do from an offensive and a defensive point of view. And when you look at the players that France have and the potential that they have to just rip an opponent apart, I think that's probably a little more likely than us going out to Paris and getting a positive result, if I'm being brutally honest about it. But I guess what you're hoping for is that, we produce a performance like we did against Portugal when we went away from home. You're hoping that the likes of an Evan Ferguson or even Aaron Connolly, who's shown a bit of form in Hull City, can come on and produce a moment of magic, or at least give us spells within games where we can control possession of the ball and progress up the pitch. But this has all the indicators that it's going to be a defense versus attack type of game, whereby France control the majority of the possession. They create a huge amount of chances. And when you've got players like Mbappe, Colin Muani, it's such a difficult place to go and get a result. There's so much experience, so much quality. Reach the last 2 World Cup finals. For us to be in a position where we need to go away and potentially get a result is not a position you want to be in at this stage in the group campaign. Yes, it was a very difficult group, but we've certainly made it a far more difficult situation with the result that we had against Greece. And if we were to produce a performance like we did against Greece, expect that this would be an absolute demolition. They knocked 4 past Netherlands. If we showed up like we did in that game against Greece, it could be something similar.
Yeah, and David, looking at the squad that has been picked overall, I mean, there aren't a huge amount of surprises. I think injuries are generally have been more of the issue in terms of who gets picked. Obviously, Andrew Omobamidele, who we might talk about a little bit later on, he's been added at the 11th hour just with the knock John Egan had.
It's a strange one. It is. It's one of those games, like what Paul said, like it's damage limitation. It really is. It's going in, and if there's Ireland have to play at the absolute maximum and hope that France are a good bit off it to get anything from the game. And because of what happened, it kind of sticks in the head, just the manner of how disjointed and how just kind of, as soon as Greece, and like with all due respect to Greece, when they were kind of turning the screw, and it wasn't as if this was in a place where like this is one of the top ranked teams in the world, like they have got a bit of momentum under Gus Poyet, but Ireland just weren't able to deal with that pressure, and the pressure that's going to be capable of coming from France is so much greater, especially away from home. Obviously, the game in Dublin, as Paul said, it had a weird kind of feel about it. It was just a case of you felt as if France were just hoping for just that one moment where Ireland would switch off to punish them. Almost, they kind of felt as if they were just waiting for that rather than really, really going after it and forcing it. And then, in fairness, when it did come, like Josh Cullen of all people, to make that mistake with the kind of the stray pass. But see, they're the moments that can happen in a game when you switch off and very easily just a stray pass that maybe in 9 out of 10 teams you play that against, you're not going to have a fellow like Pavard who, as like his last goal before that was that unbelievable goal in the World Cup. Do you know what I mean? But like a fellow who's capable of doing that. And so much of that game plan though did obviously work for Ireland, but it's going to be a totally different ball game now. And even going back to say the Greece game, and even in that previous squad, like there have been a few changes. Like Shane Duffy's come back in. Andrew Omobamidele is coming in now because obviously there's going to be that doubt over getting the assessment with John Egan. I'm going to be out at Abbottstown later for the training, and obviously I'm speaking to a few other players, and I'm sure there'll be an update coming from that. And that would be a serious blow if you're going to be, it's going to be your captain. Think about, like, Seamus Coleman's already out, your next man up, your next leader in terms of that presence. More could be absent now if he's struggling. And it is just set up. And obviously we started this conversation talking about Evan Ferguson, the kind of, he played in that France game, and he looked like an 18-year-old in that game. He looked like an 18-year-old leading the line who was maybe unsure of what he needed to be doing, and just because of the level of obviously where France were at and what was actually happening in the game. And yeah, he's probably at his most confident, but you also kind of need that other side to his performance, because he is obviously going to be starting, where you need that player who, those moments, to get those moments of respite, to actually hold the ball up, try and get you up the pitch. And then if you have that pace around, like, ideally, Ogbene, Chidozie Ogbene would have been maybe playing a few more games for Luton, and maybe have a bit more confidence in flying form, considering the job he did in that right side with Seamus Coleman the last time. You would expect him to obviously play again in that same kind of position to try and help keep Mbappe under wraps. But you kind of look through it's mad, but if you look through even all the positive signs that are in that Ireland squad and what's happening, it's still almost just reinforces the level of where these two teams are at and just how difficult it's going to be. Like, we're talking about perhaps maybe Ryan Manning possibly playing left side of defence. Maybe it'll be Enda Stevens, fellas who've come back in and they've done well, but doing well in the second tier in England, as competitive a league as that is. It's totally different now, and it's at a point where, like, if Ireland have to somehow keep France at bay, even though Stephen Kenny said it in that clip there, if you're going off this campaign at the moment, it just looks as if it's going to be a very, very hard task. And it's a case of personally looking at it, thinking, try and come out with a performance you can be proud of. You might not get the result, but have a performance you can be proud of, and hopefully in the other game with because obviously the Dutch are at home to Greece, there maybe Netherlands could be coming in on a bit of a downer because their campaign has been pretty poor. So you just want to come out with that game in France, be able to hold your head held high, and hopefully, Stephen Kenny mentioned it there, they've not lost a game by more than one goal. If they come away with the same in at the next later on this week, to be doing well. It's not maybe nice to be talking about defeats, but you're playing against one of the best teams in World Cup finals.
Yeah, we'll drill down into some of the tactics, especially the two wing back positions, very shortly. But just on Aaron Connolly, Paul, I mean, Stephen Kenny, just in his press conference on Thursday, he did note that despite Connolly's good form, he hasn't actually been starting games for Hull. But I was watching some of the goals he'd scored in the Championship this season just over the weekend, and he does bring a level of flexibility, especially if he is confident. I mean, flexibility in terms of formation, can play off the left, or also the type of goals he was scoring, like the two he scored against Blackburn, that ability to ghost into space in behind is a potential boon on the break if Ireland need an impact sub later in the game, albeit granted France, again, one of the best teams in the world, the opportunities might not be there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, first and foremost, Raf, I'm delighted to see it, because I was quite worried for Aaron in his career probably 12 months ago when he went out to Italy and it didn't seem to work out, and he was really struggling to maybe find an environment and a coach who was going to put his arm around him, and he certainly seems to have found that, and he's produced and he scored goals, which is what front men are going to be measured on. I think players like Aaron Connolly or Chidozie Ogbene are so vitally important when you play against an opposition like a France or a Holland, because really what you're looking to do is soak up a bit of pressure and then rely on a bit of pace or legs to get you up the pitch, whether that be in the first kind of half an hour or the last half an hour that Aaron might be involved in the game. He is certainly somebody who can stretch oppositions. He did it really well for Stephen Kenny when he played in the 21s, particularly from the left hand side actually, and you would be hoping that the confidence that he has in his game, just his general kind of play with how quick he is over, say, 10, 15 yards, he is somebody who could potentially come on and cause France a couple of problems. For that situation to occur, we still need to be in the game. That is probably the first port of call to, like David said, kind of keep ourselves in the game, limit the amount of chances and goals that France are potentially creating, and then rely on somebody like an Aaron Connolly. And listen, he has shown this in periods of his career. If you think back to kind of the two goals that he scored for Brighton against Tottenham, he really burst onto the scene for Brighton, and he was doing incredibly well. And then, for whatever it was, maybe a lack of focus on his part, or maybe just falling out of favour of Brighton, his career has maybe remained stationary for the last 24 months, but there's certainly something in there, Raf. I saw a lot of those 21 games when Stephen was in charge, and Aaron Conley was the standout by an absolute mile. He certainly has the capabilities if he fits into Hull and maybe starts a couple more games to really kickstart his career. And for us heading into this doubleheader with France and Holland, it is absolutely pace that we're going to rely on, because we're not going to have the majority of possession in either of the games. And you are hoping that maybe on a quick counter-attack that somebody like an Aaron Conley can cause a bit of problems. But I think for Aaron, the next 6 months are going to be important, that he continues to progress, hopefully find his way into the whole team, and then maybe you start to see him being in contention to start some of these games. But I think for France on Thursday in Paris, it's absolutely one where you might see him come off the bench and maybe link up with somebody like an Evan Ferguson.
Yeah, and David, I mean, you mentioned Andrew Omobamidele at the other end earlier on, and granted, he's a relatively late call up and more likely as cover. Where'd you see him at his career, I suppose, at this point in time? I mean, he's just moved to Nottingham Forest on deadline day, but Nottingham Forest in probably in a different way to Chelsea. They bought in bulk just without spending that level of money. So you're wondering where he's going to be in the pecking order. But also, interestingly enough, while Shane Duffy was getting the limelight at Norwich, Omobamidele, while fit, wasn't exactly getting into the team there. So it's an interesting juncture at the age that he is.
Yeah, he wasn't playing. That's the reason why he wasn't in the squad. Kind of even just making calls, and even last week before the squad was announced, and it was pretty much made clear that Duffy was the one who played himself back into contention because he was in form. And it's natural as well. I think obviously what one might have played a part in that obviously was the fact that obviously key people weren't going to be around the squad as well, and Duffy's personality around. You're probably even seeing it with that video the FAI put out, and when Aaron Connolly comes back in with Evan Ferguson, and one of the first people to greet them is Shane Duffy, But with Omobamidele, it's one of them where I think he's had a couple of issues with injury as well at key moments, with his back as well, and that can be a tricky one in terms of managing that. And I'd say mentally as well as physically, when you have to deal with that can be an issue, And obviously AC Milan were linked with him. They were they were more than linked. They were interested in him. They weren't obviously willing to go and to spend maybe the money that say Nottingham Forest have been able to, which just kind of goes to show you where we're at with modern football and the power of the Premier League. But with him, it's a strange one, because he'd be it's almost mad, but he was one of those exciting players that were kind of emerging. I remember being at his debut when he came on for Darragh O'Shea against Portugal in that qualifier in Faro, when obviously O'Shea had that bad ankle injury, and Omobamidele came in and was quality. Just sometimes, where lads just settle straight into it, and he just seemed to just grasp the opportunity, not a bother. And then in the Serbia game as well, when they had that great chance, great chance it wasn't, it was just a great shot where when Ireland had gotten back into the game and they were making that late surge to try and win, and he was kind of on that right side of the back three and was driving forward. He's someone who is clearly a very capable player, but he's like a lot of the Irish players at the moment, where they've shown that little kind of flash and sporadic kind of just quality, but at the moment it's about sustaining it, and it's just about, like Paul mentioned earlier, about say Evan Ferguson, you can just enjoy watching his career take off. I'd say Andrew Omobamidele was the same. You're kind of thinking this is going to be one of those where he has all the tools in terms of intelligence as a defender, the physical attributes that are needed, the mentality that was needed. An injury have held him back at the moment, and he's obviously left Norwich, the club he's basically been at since he signed from League Slip. And now he's going to not now, obviously he's going to be on Ireland duty, but if you're looking forward down the line for where his career is at, he's going to be at a junction where he has to go into a club and get into the team and play. And so it's in the Premier League especially, it does strike me, and maybe Forest are obviously building that squad. It's going to be extremely difficult to get in there. I think the fact that you can play in a tree, you can probably play in the centre of a tree, on the right of a tree, or as he showed even when he on a couple of times where maybe you can play as a right back, as well if needed. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's probably part of Stephen Kenny's thinking here as well, in terms of you look at Matt Doherty having that extra suspension for the France game, and maybe he's already kind of referenced the fact that he sees Festy Ebosele as more of an attacking player. I wouldn't be surprised if Omobamidele comes in and plays right wing back for the France game, because let's be honest, you're going to need more defenders on that pitch. You're going to need fellas who are switched on, and he's going to be capable of it. And then those moments where maybe in this game, if Ireland are going to be given the license to have that little bit of adventure when you get the chance. He also has the attributes to be able to get up the pitch and support too. So, I wouldn't be surprised if he starts. But then, just after the internationals, it's just about getting in and playing games. Like, there's a few lads there now that you just at that stage where they just need to go play, try and establish themselves really now in their careers and just try and kick on, and it's such a difficult thing. It's so difficult because there's so much competition, it really is.
Yeah, and Kenny did talk about the right-hand side of the pitch with me at the Aviva last Thursday, and this is off the back of, as you said, Matt Doherty getting the extra game suspension, and it took a little while for that to be confirmed because obviously red card was against Greece back in June.
It was only late July. Got the thing sent out from UEFA, sent me out the details of it, and it was had a meeting on the 25th of July.
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah.
They weren't obviously expecting it, or kind of obviously they've known about it since then, but they weren't expecting it beforehand.
Yeah, so here's Stephen Kenny on that, and I'm also touching on Festi Abasele, who's been called up, still uncapped, and then the other options, which is going to be either Alan Brown or Jason Knight potentially, and as you said, also Andrew Omobamidele maybe comes in as an option on that side. But let's hear what Stephen Kenny had to say.
I was really disappointed with that. That was to be honest, it's only a yellow card in my view. Anyway, the instant he's walked over and shouldered a player who's just absolutely hit the deck and maximised an opportunity to get Matt sent off. Now, obviously, he's got 2 matches for that then. So it's incredibly harsh. We've had very good discipline. We haven't had any players sent off in a long time, and certainly we've had good discipline within the team. I thought it was to get 2 matches it doesn't seem. It doesn't seem fair really, or doesn't seem consistent with what's happening elsewhere. So, I spoke to our legal team. We had several meetings on it, but in the end, they felt we didn't have a case under the regulations to appeal it. So that was it.
Yeah, and was that sort of the reason why Festi Abasele has been called up, just as cover for the first game at least?
No. Festi gives us options, both as a right winger and as an attacking right wing back. So he obviously made his debut, or not his debut, but his first start of the season against Juventus. He came on in the second game, and he's made a big move, cultural move, gone to Italy, adapting to the language, new teammates, new style of play. So you can only benefit from that, you feel, and you can learn a lot, I'm sure. And he has great natural attributes, and he's all the time working to improve and get better.
And for the France game, are you looking at him as a potential starter despite his relative inexperience, or are you looking at Alan Brown, who you've used there, or even Jason Knight?
Yeah, we have a few options. Not too many orthodox right wing backs there, but we've loads of players who can play in that position, and we'll make that decision on the night, because he'll have not a bad player to mark in Mbappe that night, so we have to make sure we get that one right.
Yeah, Stephen Kenny there, not wrong about the task of marking Kylian Mbappe. So good luck to whoever has that role. But Paul, I mean, on that side, obviously you can focus on one player as in the right wing back in terms of the task they have with Mbappe, and then also Theo Hernandez on that side as well. But realistically, what we saw in the game in the Aviva back in March was it was a collective effort. Seamus Coleman obviously started on that side on that night, but it was Nathan Collins, Coleman, and then the important piece in it was Ogbene sort of playing further forward, but also tracking Hernandez and then trying to block the space. So whoever gets picked, it's going to be part of a collective scheme.
Say Matt Doherty might have been hoping for a 2-game ban. Going up against Mbappe in Paris. Yeah, it's an interesting one, Raf. It's a difficult decision to make. Like, do you kind of double up again and try to get a more defensive-minded player into that right wing-back position and try double up on Mbappe, or do you try put somebody like a Chidoze in that wing-back position and try get you up the pitch? It's probably the side, particularly when you mention kind of Hernandez and Mbappe, that you have to go with a more defensive-minded player, and that's maybe where somebody like Omobamidele comes in. You certainly need athleticism, you need legs, and you need bodies around Mbappe when you play against him. So yeah, I'd say Stephen would probably go with somebody a little more defensive minded. For Festi Abasele, that would be a huge game to be thrown into for your full debut, and maybe one that Stephen might veer away from. I know he's been a manager who's always kind of filled players with confidence and not being afraid to put them into big games. But for me, that's probably one where you lean on experience and try get somebody, and like we did in Dublin, to double up, whether it be kind of Nathan Collins or whoever that might be, to come across, because the threat that Mbappe poses down that side. I know he wasn't probably at his brilliant best when we played them in Dublin, but if you look at his goals per game for France, it's frightening. And I think he put in 2 against the Dutch when they played them early on in the group. So it's certainly an area of concern. But I mean, if you focus too much on Mbappe, you maybe deflect the attention away from some of the other players, and they've just got so much class across the pitch that it's going to be a very difficult battle. But listen, what we hope is kind of what David mentioned earlier on in the podcast, is that we have a really good day and they're maybe slightly off it. Hang in there for as long as you possibly can, and then hope that whether it be somebody like an Aaron Connolly or an Evan Ferguson will produce a moment of magic, or maybe a set piece and get a result. I think that's very unlikely, Raf, if I'm being honest. I can see this being a kind of a 2-3-0 game before I can see it being a situation where we get a point from it. And then if we were to lose against the Dutch, there's pressure on Stephen, because we'd be looking at a group where we only have 3 points, and that would have been against Gibraltar. So yeah, a good performance, I think, is what we can hope. A result, I think, is very out of reach here.
Yeah.
And sorry, Rafa, it was just one of the things that kind of has stuck, and it's stuck in my head, and I imagine it's been in Stephen Kenny's head and the staff, but like Greece's second goal and how Callum O'Dowda got cut out, and just the gap, the distances that were between. I think I'm almost saying it was Nathan Collins, or I can't remember who it was, the left-sided centre-back anyway.
Darragh Lenihan, I think.
Yeah. And if you're looking at maybe... That's a mistake, obviously, from the centre-backs, but it's also a mistake from the full-back and the wing-back getting Costas squared as well. Like that's surely going to be in Stephen Kenny's head, in terms of, like, you can't be that open, you can't be that left exposed against a team like France. And then the only other thing that's in my head, and again, this is like, just I wonder in terms of psychology, and Paul will obviously know this as a former professional, but like, I know it's going to heap more pressure on it. But if you're looking at clinging to what do players cling to, but like genuinely, when you do have a player like a Ferguson at the moment who actually might only need one chance, that might be sometimes but gives players something more to actually fight for in a game a little bit, in terms of trying to stay more compact, when actually, do you know what, it could be worth just really, really digging in and knowing that, if one chance could come, this fella is well capable of doing it. You might have a fella up top, and God knows Ireland have had that over the last year, where you could defend all you want, but even if you get a chance, you're probably not going to score. And sometimes I wonder, does that play into the psychology of players when they feel like, we've got a fella up there who, if we can just get him one chance and somehow do all we can to keep France out, it just might keep Ireland alive maybe longer in the game, even going into it. I don't know, it could be totally the wrong way for myself just thinking of it, but it is something that you're thinking where, well, what can you cling to? What can you actually use as extra motivation in a game to try and get you through it when those horrible moments and horrible periods where you're going to be chasing shadows,
Yeah, you mentioned the left side there, and David, and I wonder, like, how do you expect Kenny to select his choices there? Because there's the experience of McLean, but as much has been made of the fact he's playing League Two football, probably not relevant this early in the season in terms of this specific game. But then you also have Enda Stevens, who's coming back in, has relative experience, and then Ryan Manning, who has only got 6 caps at this stage for Ireland, and has had a good start to the season for Southampton, but then was part of a defence that got torn apart by Sunderland. Of course, Bazunu part of that as well. But you look on that side, Coleman or Dembele, who are both handy enough. Coleman scored in Champions League finals, and that Dembele played in the World Cup final. How do you expect Kenny to go? Is it more experience, or will he go with Manning, do you think?
I don't know. Sometimes you read between the lines, obviously, with any manager, and you hear Stephen Kenny talking about, even with Ryan Manning, who again was out of favour in the last squad as well. I know there was personal issues as well that weren't there, but there's obviously, issues is probably the wrong word, but it's not a player who he at the moment I think Stephen Kenny will hang his hat on. And in a game when this importance, I think it's understandable you go with a fella who you might think, you can trust him 100% in terms of how he's going to carry out certain instructions. And for me, I'd say that like even though he hasn't started the last couple of games, I don't think I'd say James McLean could come in there. Again, the Stevens has come back in, and again, he's playing games at Stoke City. Again, it's good to see that, because he had a real tough time of it with Sheffield United. Like, in the last game, obviously, it was Doherty on that side, you had O'Shea on that side. Sometimes as well, I don't know, like, sometimes it could be, I don't know if lads can strike up partnerships, or if they even know, but sometimes on that side of the pitch, we go, well, how do you actually work with a fella? Do you work in tandem on that side? That's going to be important as well. It's not going to be a one-man job. Just obviously there'll be moments where there will be obviously you have to win your own battle, but it's how you work with people on that side of the pitch as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if James McLean is the one who gets the nod, just because he is so experienced, but he's also been a regular in that squad. Again, the Stevens hasn't been about it because of injury. Ryan Manning has been in and out. I just think it's the logical choice in terms of just in a squad that has had a lot of changes as well, in terms of personnel, in terms of fellas coming in and out and all the rest. That would strike me as the logical choice.
Yeah, so whatever happens against France, it doesn't get much easier, because then on Sunday the Netherlands are in town at the Aviva Stadium, and I'll be chatting to Dutch football journalist Bart Vlietstra about what we can expect from Ronald Koeman's side, as well as a word on Troy Parrott's new club, Excelsior, and then I'll also ask him about the reaction, if any, that there has been to the Vera Pauw situation in her homeland. And speaking of Vera Pauw, she was speaking in depth to Tony O'Donoghue, the RT soccer correspondent, last Friday, and this is in the wake of her contract not being renewed with the FAI, and obviously the Republic of Ireland women's national team moving into a new era now. She was talking about her relationship with the FAI, some of the misgivings she's had in the build-up to the World Cup, and then during it as well. And here's a short clip from that exclusive interview, which you can watch on the RT News YouTube channel, the RT Sport YouTube channel, and also on rt.ie.
Now we came back from Perth after the Canada game, and we had to fly through the night. We arrived early in the morning, so everybody slept only 3 hours. I sent them to their beds for 6 hours, and then we were going to train. And of course, the lineup in the pool. But now the players were tired, so the doctor told me that they couldn't train, that she strongly advised to not train with the players. But the subs had to train. Everybody knows that they have to train matchday +1. But it ended up with that I was told, if somebody rolls her ankle, do you know that you can get a safeguarding claim on you? And I thought, right, this is it. I'm the expert in the load of the players, and I've now been told to not load the players, which meant matchday -1, you don't do much. Matchday, they did some runs. Matchday +1, no training. Matchday +2 is always a free day. So at the end of matchday +3, they would train 5 days of hardly or no training. Everybody knows that that cannot be during a World Cup. And I'm so proud that what we did in the gym, we actually drove with the bus a circle so that the fans would be away, so that nobody saw, because the players were sitting on the bus at that moment already. And together with Kim, the physio, and myself, we set up a program that at least the toners on their legs were built up, and that the stability was built up so that they wouldn't get injured. But everybody knows that it's the coach, the head coach, who is the performance manager. And I am educated over 35 years and have the experience to know that at that moment the players who did not play had to train. But you can imagine that if all the tools are taken away from you, that everybody can do whatever they want to, you have no tools anymore.
So your authority was undermined. How did that manifest itself in terms of the players and their attitude towards you or their actions towards you?
Well, everybody knows that the bond between me and the players was so good. And there was space for friction, and there was space for discussion, and there was space for joy, and there was space for laughter. But now I just felt the players drifting away in their looks to me, and in the way that they were dealing with it. And I found out that behind my back, all things were happening.
All right, so that is former Republic of Ireland manager Vera Pauw speaking exclusively to Tony O'Donoghue last Friday. And of course, this, as I said, is after the non-renewal of her contract last Tuesday, as confirmed by the FAI. And this was following a review into the World Cup and into her tenure as well. And Paul, I mean, the initial reaction after the World Cup and during the period of uncertainty over her contract, and then before she actually came out with her initial statement and then this interview, it was all around the issue of player power. But from her interview, this has completely shifted the narrative now to something else.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it seems like there was so much going on behind the scenes, and you hear whispers of it from people who maybe know people within the camp, and it certainly seemed like all was not well. But yeah, first and foremost, there was the piece with the players. Like, it's interesting to hear her say there, Raf, that the bond was very good with the players, because on the review, it seems like the players seem to have enough of Vera, and had kind of wanted a change in the environment, change in personnel, and wanted Vera out. That's certainly the way it seemed from the outside. But it also seems now that maybe there was more play, and maybe the coaching staff were on a similar sort of mentality or sentiment as well, whereby they had maybe lost trust in Vera, and all was not well. So that certainly didn't bode well. It didn't show in the performances, though, when we're out in Australia. I thought the performances against all three teams were very strong, considering the group that we were in and the teams that we had to play against, and just the occasion that was involved. So I thought our performances were really good. And I think from a purely footballing point of view, like when you look back at Vera's tenure and the results that she got and the fact that we qualified for the tournament, I think she's done really well. I think she can stand over those results, and I think she leaves with credit in the bank. But off the pitch seems to be in an absolute disaster. Like they met up very early in advance of that World Cup, and when you're spending that much time with anybody, particularly in that kind of high pressurized environment, it seemed like by the end of the tournament the players had just had enough of Vera. That certainly seems what it was like, and if you listen to any of the kind of the reviews that are coming out from the FAI, there's questions that need to be answered there, but you could probably join the dots about, you know, the sentiment of the players, and maybe there was an element of kind of the style of play as well, which I wouldn't totally agree with. But it probably came to a natural end. And maybe it's better for Vera that she gets out now, Raf, off the back of a decent tournament, and kind of protects her CV a bit. But it's disappointing to see how much it fell apart. And I'm sure in time, some more of those stories will probably be leaked out, and you'll maybe get a bit more clarity as to why things were so fractured. But it certainly seems like relationships between her staff, relationships between the players were broken by the end. And the fact that Eileen Gleeson and David Amstad have stayed on would suggest that it was absolutely only Vera. Because if it was the whole management team, I'm sure they would have cleaned everybody out and gone with a completely new slate. But the fact that a lot of the people are still there would certainly point to the problem solely lying with the relationship with Vera.
Yeah, and the issue of communication as well between the FAI and Vera Pauw, dating back to December, and obviously in the background as well, the Athletic pieces, the initial one, and then the one that was published this year as well, David. It kind of points to issues in communication between manager and then management.
Yeah, like it's one of them now where at the moment, in terms of communication, there's a vacuum now, because the FAI aren't saying anything, like they're waiting until after the men's games, these qualifiers, to come up. But like their handling of it at the moment has been a bit strange, to be honest, and just the nature of how the board meeting was carried out and how that went on for so long, and then how it was actually communicated to Vera Pauw that her contract wasn't going to be getting renewed. And then obviously she comes out and does the interview with Tony and lays out some pretty startling kind of points from her perspective, and how she kind of has viewed things, and how kind of stuff that she's maybe learned or understood about the situation. Like, it's some of it is a bit bizarre. Some of it is the most kind of basic stuff in football, where sometimes relationships fracture between a manager and staff and players and all the rest of it. And in the club game, it's not, maybe it doesn't happen around the time of a World Cup or even internationals, although Ireland tends to have history with maybe a bit of drama at World Cups. But it just seems a bit bizarre that it's happened at this point, especially when, and I've said this a couple of times, because but it's worth remembering, if you go back to the playoff in Scotland, and Katie McCabe and Denise O'Sullivan are on the pitch after the result, and they're talking about how much they love this style of play, how much they bought into it, what Vera Pauw demands of them, and the expectations that she puts on them, and the demands she puts on them. Like, everyone was happy then because they had this great moment, you know what I mean? Then obviously stuff happens where the World Cup is coming around. Vera Pauw's made a couple of decisions on the squad, new personnel come in. You can, like, that's obviously going to play a factor. There's no way, there's no getting away from that. People can then have doubts about, well, how does she want to actually go and achieve results? Like, people are expecting, again, like, you see it what's happened with Ireland, but even with, say, on the men's side of it, and you see people compare them, but it's like, what's the point? It's totally different teams of how something's happened and how the FAI have broached this. It's totally bizarre that you seem to have to compare what's happened with the men's team with the women's team. You have to take the situation in isolation and what's actually happened with it. And it seems bizarre that all of a sudden you would qualify for a tournament by doing something for so long and so successfully over a period of time, and even how Vera Pauw had set it up with the friendlies that she had at the start, and what the man she was putting on players where they didn't win a game for like the first 7, 8, 9 games, because she wanted to increase the competition in the squad and actually show the levels they had to reach it. And then even with the World Cup, and like I know Paul mentioned it there, and like it was one of the things I went before the World Cup, I went to obviously after Abby Larkin got called up, went to her house, and I was kind of thinking, just I wonder how this is, because she's 18 and like she's been called up, and like it was a long build up, and obviously that was around the time as well that obviously saying back in December when the allegations came out in the Athletic, first was the NWSL report, which I'll be honest, like considering she was named in that with other people who were accused of far more serious incidents, like you're kind of thinking, what Vera Pauw is getting caught up in this, when really the worst stuff that's been labelled against her is that she's controlling or maybe overbearing or places extreme demands on players, which so many managers and coaches would do. And then obviously Vera Pauw has contacted the Athletic when that report gets, when that investigation comes out, and it obviously comes out the week of the France game. And everything's the same really that's in it, in terms of there's nothing new in there, in terms of you've got maybe a few more kind of insights into stuff that would have happened at the clubs and stuff, but and I'll be honest, maybe I don't know if this is me from a perspective of, I don't know, maybe not understanding the gravity of it, but I'm coming out there thinking, like, she's just being extremely demanding here. Like, she's a extremely competent coach who has utter belief in her and conviction in what she wants to do, which is exactly what you want from any head coach. In terms of, like, and if she's wrong, but you still want them to believe in it. Like, you could be wrong and doing it for the sake of it almost, and floating along and taking the paycheck and all the rest of it. But this isn't what she was doing. She just seems to have her conviction in it. So the reason why I mentioned the thing with Abby Larkin is like, she spoke so positively about, like, actually Vera Pauw was the one who was getting more out of her and putting more demands on her and saying to her and showing her in certain instances of how she can get more out of her game and to believe herself more and to trust herself more. And that even extended to, like, the day before I met her, she was at the Longitude Festival. So, like, the players were given, when they were in the camp in Dublin, the players were given an awful lot of time off as well, and given time, especially the players who actually lived in Dublin as well, to be able to go home. It wasn't the case that they were under lock and key, and, like, you go back to, say, some other you hear some of the stories from World Cups where players talk about the boredom and all the rest of it. Like, before they got on that plane, they were given an awful lot of trust as well by the manager, and told, listen, obviously, like what she said there about the training days and all the rest of it, when I want you, you have to be all in, and the demands are going to be on you. But when you're not needed, I trust you to go and just, like in Abby Larkin's case, you can go to a music festival with your friends, like the week of the France game. Do you know what I mean? She trusted, like, it wasn't as if they were, like, kept in the lock and key and all the rest of it. And there's no getting away from it. It's a sad way of how it's ended. It has now ended, and now it's up to the FAI, as it's been reported over the last while. They're kind of saying, well, you know, we don't want a manager like Vera Pauw anymore, who maybe is a bit of a kind of outlier to how we want the whole coaching structure within the association, and the approach they're gonna have to take. That's now going to have to bear fruit. That's now going to have to work. You know, like, Vera Pauw has shown what was capable of with her methods with this Ireland team at this stage. Now it's a case of, right, well, you build on it, and that's fair enough. And it's not as if overnight I think everything's going to change in how Ireland play and the style of play. That's just not going to happen. But if they were using this World Cup and how they qualified as this, they kind of almost like, you know, the starting point. Well, this is now how we're going to progress things and go in line with how the game is as a whole. Well, then okay, but then you have to go and deliver success with it and make sure the methods now that are going to work are actually in place and actually are there, and the structures are there to actually be able to have the success that's already been achieved.
Yeah, and we're going to get Sue Ronan's take on the recent turn of events. So she's obviously former Republic of Ireland manager herself. But first, here's Vera Pauw discussing her misgivings with how she felt the FAI conducted their review.
That review was done by the technical director. He's not trained to make reviews, and he was part of the process. So the assignment on the technical director is something that to do a review immediately starting while still in camp after the Nigeria game is something that you cannot reflect. The evaluation has not been done, and he started with my assistant. So first my assistant, then the communication manager, and I came in as third person. And I felt immediately that my assistant had set the benchmark with things that were absolutely ridiculous. For example, he had said that there was no communication, we did not discuss things. Every morning we had a staff meeting, and every single detail of, let's say, my tasks have been discussed, from the setup of the training sessions, from the game plan, the strategies, every single detail we discussed with us. Whereas, in fact, the information that I had to get from him never received. I never ever received one document about the scouting, for example. The scouts put their documents in the drive, but there was no overall analysis. And the first moment that I got it was the moment it was presented to the players. And then I was told that I was late in the analysis towards the players.
Were you interviewed for this review?
I was as third in camp still, without distance, without evaluation first of the aims and targets.
All right, Sue, thanks very much for taking the time. I suppose before we get into Vera Pauw, her interview, and some of the things she was talking about in regard to her relationship with the FAI, what was your overall assessment of Ireland's World Cup performance? Were you looking at it as from a glass half full perspective or a glass half empty?
Well, first of all, as we all know, it was a great achievement getting to the World Cup, our first major finals in the 50-year history of the women's game here. So that was really a great and a momentous occasion for the team and the coach, of course. We were pitted in a difficult enough group. It was called the Group of Death. And I think it was sort of called the Group of Death because all four teams were capable of qualifying. We had two really strong teams in the Olympic champions, Canada, and obviously the host Australia, and then the top African team. So it was going to be tough. But I always felt, the teams would take points off each other going into the World Cup. We know then how it went. Obviously, we missed out in qualifying, but, it was fine margins. We performed really well against Australia. Personally, I thought maybe we gave them a little bit too much respect in the first half, but we nullified all their threats. And then, of course, when you give away a silly goal, a penalty, you're chasing your tail. But we really put it up to them in the last 20-25 minutes and showed that we weren't out of place and we could have got something from the game. Unfortunately, we didn't. Then second game, we came out of the traps flying. I'm not sure anyone expected that. We sort of flipped from that defensive low block to more attacking shape. And I suppose we had to, because we couldn't afford to lose that game. And, I think if we got the second goal in that first half, when our dominance really deserved it, we would have went on to win it. But unfortunately then, as we know, things went a bit pear-shaped for us in the second half. And then we were out really, and we were playing a very good African team, Nigeria, who I think they only needed a draw to go through in the end. And they sort of played for that draw. And it was difficult enough to break them down. So overall, how did we perform? We certainly didn't look out of place. We certainly didn't let ourselves down. Personally, I felt it was probably one that got away. We could potentially have gotten through that group as well. I keep saying we didn't have those teams that you just are never going to beat in that group, like mind you, some of them now have subsequently been beaten, obviously, but, your Englands, your Spains, at the time we were thinking USA, Germany, Japan. Obviously Germany and USA didn't work out in the end. Japan probably not unlucky not to go further. So those teams weren't in the group, but look, we did very well. We were respectable, and I think it showed that we belong at that stage. So hopefully we continue to qualify for major finals.
Yeah, what was your view on the debate around the style of play and, the pragmatism that Vera Pauw had brought to the team, which obviously had played a part in helping them to qualify? Do you think maybe there was room for more, a more progressive style of play, or do you feel that was a little bit unrealistic given the challenges in the group and also the attributes of the players that were in the squad?
Yeah, I think the tactics were the right tactics to get us qualification. Vera came in and made us a very difficult team to beat. She set us up in a shape that teams found it hard to break down. We were organised, we were compact, and we did show, flair in a number of matches, to win the games. I always think about the 2 games against Sweden. I thought we were excellent in those games. The 2 games against USA, we were excellent. Probably less shackles on us as such against USA because they weren't competitive games, and we could maybe show ourselves in an attacking sense a little bit more. But yeah, I think it was right probably to go in initially to be cautious in the first game, but and ease your way in. I don't think we could go in and be all out attack. We had to respect the opposition to a certain extent, but I think once we got a bit of a foothold in that game, we potentially could have, maybe attacked a little bit more. I've said it, or been on the offensive a little bit more at times, and as I say, not all the time, but maybe at times in the game, just loosen the shackles a little bit, maybe get a bit more advanced and show what we're about going forward, because we have some world-class players. And again, I've said before, for me, I would prefer to see Katie McCabe and Denise O'Sullivan particularly, and Megan Connolly, but particularly the former 2, playing in more advanced roles, because they make the team tick. And we saw what happened when they did, when they were in more advanced roles, and we created some great opportunities. We really put it up to the Canadians, as I said. We put it up to the Australians in the last 20-25 minutes. So could we have attacked a little bit more, or could we have had a more attacking shape? I think at times, a mix with that defensive stability where we were hard to break down. But look, at the end of the day, the coach makes a decision, and she knows more about, I guess, at what stage players are at in terms of fitness and in terms of form, and then I suppose what she feels is going to be best to win the games.
Yeah, and then obviously last Tuesday, the FAI confirmed they're not offering Vera Pauw a new contract, start of a new era. What was your take on that decision? Obviously, the results are one aspect of it. There's other criteria as well, I'm sure, that they would have been looking at. But would you have? Do you feel Vera Pauw deserved another contract and another spell in charge?
Well, if you're going purely on the pitch, you could say she did, and I said that before the World Cup. She got us to the first major tournament, and we've seen coaches in the past get new contracts on foot of qualifying for major tournaments and before they go. And we've seen it in other sports as well. It happens in rugby all the time. It's happened previously with some of the men's managers, Trapattoni, I think, to name one anyway, and potentially Martin O'Neill also. So if you're looking at it from that point of view, you could say, yes, she did deserve a new contract. Were they waiting to see how the results went in the World Cup before making that decision? Potentially, and we weren't shamed there either. I suppose we all feel maybe we could, on another day, we could potentially got out of that group, but we didn't let ourselves down either. So I don't think the results would have determined somebody not getting a new contract. I think it had become evident before the World Cup that the relationship had soured. Certainly maybe between Vera and the players, and between Vera and the FAI as well, for a number of reasons. And I think that's probably more at play here than the results, than the on-pitch stuff.
Yeah, because of course the timing was an issue. Now there was, talk of a potential new contract as early as late last year, and then it sort of rumbled on before the World Cup into it as well. And at the same time, there's that report from The Athletic about her time in the NWSL, and all of this, I'm sure, played a part in how things evolved. So, how do you feel the FAI maybe should have handled that period? Because I guess it wasn't particularly conducive to, a good World Cup, or at least making Vera Pauw's job easier, and also for the players as well.
Yeah, I think obviously we know the FAI have conducted a review now, and based off those findings, they've effectively decided not to renew the contract, and that's what they're saying. And as I said, I think the general public here could read between the lines that things seem to have soured for whatever reason, or for a number of reasons. But I think the FAI, there is a vacuum now of, there's a lack of information coming. And I think, unfortunately, there's been a backlash against the players, which I think is unfair. Players, of course, will have been asked for their opinion in the review, as they should be. And, what they said, or whatever they said, they wouldn't have said it lightly. So I think, I think the FAI need to come out now and, explain exactly why they haven't given Vera the new contract, because, as I say, players are being slaughtered on social media. Vera's come out now with her statement with various points that she's made in that, or accusations, for want of a better word, about different things that happened or in Australia and before. So I think really the FAI needs to clarify now why they didn't give her a new contract. And look, it is their right, and every manager, the time a manager's in situ, it does evolve, and it comes to a natural end at some point, whether you agree with it or not when you're the coach. But I think, just for clarity now, the FAI need to come out and say exactly what the reasons are why they haven't renewed the contract.
Yeah, because Pauw has spoken about feeling undermined in terms of her authority before and during the tournament, as you said. And one of the things she was saying, the FAI were speaking to staff members and players regarding their roles in the team in the build-up to the tournament, and then during it as well. And from the parts of the interview, now she did the interview with Tony O'Donoghue, our soccer correspondent, on Friday. What did you make of some of the examples she was discussing in that?
Yeah, there was some interesting stuff in it, wasn't there? I mean, she spoke about, she's quite clear on the fact that she feels the review wasn't conducted correctly, that it started, I think she said it started immediately after the Nigeria game, and there wasn't a time given for reflection. She also said that it started with her assistant and the communications manager, and not with her. And if she's responsible for the mandate given to the team by the FAI, that it should have started with her. She also feels Mark Callum isn't qualified enough to conduct the review. So there's a lot of stuff in there. She mentions that FAI executives interfered in non-footballing executives, I think was the word, interfered in footballing issues. And I don't know exactly what she means by that, but I mean, it's not unreasonable to have FAI senior staff around the camp. Of course, there are certain times when they shouldn't be involved with the team and the coach. There's certain times that'll be sacrosanct, the dressing room, probably the training pitch, and potentially mealtime as well, which is something that Vera mentioned. That's probably the time that you do build a bit of a bond with your players, or things can be said or whatever. But there would be times when they would be around, and I don't see anything wrong with that. I also don't see anything wrong with FAI executives speaking to players or speaking to different people, around the camp, and they could be talking about things as simple as the facilities, or communication responsibilities, or the kit, or something as simple as that, or travel, whatever, logistics, and that's all reasonable, because there are FAI staff there that, that's their responsibility. They're the experts in those areas, and I don't see any issues with that. However, if they were speaking to players about on-pitch stuff, as Vera seems to allude to, that's absolutely incorrect, and that shouldn't be the case. But again, as I say, Vera has said what she said now, and we need the FAI to come out and either clarify or deny or whatever, so we know exactly, what has happened.
Yeah, what do you make of the sort of relative silence of the players as well? I mean, obviously, Vera Pauw has come out and said she actually has a pretty good relationship with most of the players have got in contact in the wake of the decision not to have her contract renewed, and also that she had an hour-long conversation with Katie McCabe, and that they're totally fine and that their relationship is good now. But what do you make of the relative silence? Because a lot of people have put a bit of focus on that, but again, others have argued that the players have returned to their clubs, they're not there as a collective, so there isn't going to be a united message anyway, because they're not all in one place.
Yeah, I suppose it's probably a little bit maybe strange that you haven't had players come out a little bit on social media. I suppose all young people are on social media these days. But look, I wouldn't harp on that either. I wouldn't blame them. From what Vera says all along in all right through the press conferences in the World Cup, I think she was asked about why they didn't comment on or support her during the press conferences, and she seemed to allude to the fact that they'd been briefed, what to say, what not to say. So potentially, if that's the case, they're sort of taking that one step further. They're just leaving it alone and letting whatever has to come out in the public come out from the FAI and not get involved in that respect. And the fact that she said very many of them, I think she said most of them had contacted her directly, which was good to see. And I'm sure anyone that hasn't in time will, because she would have done a lot for those players. But I suppose, it is a world of social media these days, and the general public, I guess, is going to look at that and say it is very strange that they haven't come out. And perhaps you could say, maybe it is, but I as I said, I wouldn't blame them. I don't think it's their role. They're not the mouthpiece, I guess, for the FAI. They're players. They concentrate in the next game. And I always say players are selfish, and I was one myself, and I'm sure I was selfish too. You're concentrating on your next game. You want to know if you're playing. And they could be looking at, like, a lot of those are young players too. They could be thinking to themselves, there's a new manager going to be coming in now. I don't want to be seen as someone who's out on social media. I don't know. But yeah, it's probably a little strange, but I wouldn't attach any blame to the players in this respect at all.
Yeah, and Eileen Gleeson, for the moment anyway, is an interim charge, and obviously big task is the Nations League opener, which is against Northern Ireland later this month, and a historic game at the Aviva Stadium, first time that they're going to be playing there. But all of this that has emerged in recent times, and all of the discussion, I guess it's an unenviable task for Eileen Gleeson in the build up to that, because it's a lot of the talk is going to be dominated by what's happened before.
Yeah, and I think this was the problem as well. I think in the lead up to the World Cup, and you could see Katie McCabe's frustration at that was at the last press conference just before the French game, probably the main press conference before they departed for Australia. Most of the questioning centered around the article in The Athletic, and it wasn't around the game. And likewise in Australia, most of the questioning to the players was centering around Vera's contract and, would she be staying, would she be going? And players want to play, they want to talk about the game, they want to be asked about the game. And they probably got very frustrated. There was all that exterior noise. And unfortunately, it's going to be the same again. And the fact that the FAI have come out and not clarified things and cleared things up is just going to drag it on a little bit more. And as we get closer to that game, of course, the focus of all those press conferences now is going to be why they didn't keep Vera, why, what's the rationale behind it. And that's just such a shame, because, this team has really, not that it's put football on the map here, because, there has been great development in the last number of years, but it certainly has made it more visible. It's made it more attractive to sponsors. It's made it more attractive to media outlets, which is fantastic, because once it's out there, once it can be seen, you've got young kids then that can dream. And it's made it more visible to young kids who are the players of the future. And that's what we should be talking about. We should be talking about the game. We should be talking about, this historic moment at the Aviva Stadium, this match against Northern Ireland, which I would hope we would win, the Nations League, this new competition. How can we get out of this? How can we potentially get a playoff for Euros 2025? And that needs to be now the focus. And I think if the FAI just come out and clarify things, that might put that to bed for a bit. But as long as they don't, there's always going to be those questions that will be asked. That's just the nature of journalism.
Yeah, I think the expectation is they're gonna, and the FAI CEO Jonathan Hill will probably make a comment on it after the upcoming men's internationals. I think that's apparently the plan anyway. It's to let Stephen Kenny and his squad sort of get over the France and Netherlands games, and then to discuss that. But we'll have to wait and see when that happens. But in terms of the Nations League, then Northern Ireland, Hungary, Albania, and this idea that the style might evolve. Now Eileen Gleeson is in interim charge. We'll see what happens in terms of a permanent manager. But will it be hard to judge an evolution in the Nations League given the caliber of opposition, or will it be more of a wait and see till the qualifying campaign when there will be some of the elite teams involved there?
I think so. I think the caliber of opposition, we are in Group B of the Europa League. So obviously by virtue of that, we're going to be playing weaker teams. I think we just missed the cut for Group A. So we're probably one of the top seeds, if not the top seed in Group B. So we would be expected to beat these teams who are ranked a lot lower than us. And I know we could say Nigeria were ranked much lower than us, which they were, but I think the ranking system is in Africa. The African teams don't seem to play as many games, as many friendlies, so therefore maybe they're not getting the ranking points, to bring them up the rankings as such. But look, Albania are a weak team. Hungary are weak enough, and Northern Ireland, no disrespect to Northern Ireland, they did fantastic qualifying for the Euros there last year, the 2022 Euros. They have a new coach in as well. They might have a new style of play, but we have a better team than all those three teams, and that's not blowing our horn as such. We have a couple of world-class players, and we've got some great young talent up and coming. I think Eileen will play a different style of play, obviously by virtue of the opposition, but I think her style of play is a bit different to Vera's anyway. So it will be difficult to judge, but also it would be great to, get back on the horse and come out of that with coming undefeated, because you're giving the confidence again to the group going in then to the qualifying campaign for the European Championships.
Yeah, I suppose finally the criteria for the next manager, what do you expect it to be? Because there is a sense that the FAI want things to be aligned in terms of coaching at the different age grades, and whether that's in the men's or the women's grade or the women's games. And there was a sense maybe that from what Pauw sort of implied in her interview with Tony, that maybe there was a sense that they viewed her as being slightly outside of that kind of line in terms of coaching philosophy.
Yeah, like even in my day when I was coaching the team, there was a philosophy. All the teams play the same way. You played 4-3-3, and the underage teams play the same. There was that link with the underage teams because players are moving up and down, and particularly with the younger players, especially then, 5-6 years ago, they weren't being developed at the clubs. We didn't have underage national leagues, so players were playing at quite a low level in regional leagues. So you needed to be sort of new developing. The national teams were sort of developing those players, so you wanted them all playing the same way. When they stepped up to the national team, it was quite smooth, a smooth transition, and that's the way it is on the men's side, and that's the way it was on the women's side. Whether that changed when Vera came in, it seemed to a little bit. I think a new coach coming in will definitely have to align that. I would also, first of all, it's a great opportunity. I think it's going to be it's an attractive job. I think you're going to have many people who will be interested in that job, potentially from here and also from abroad. I know some people already, texting me about it, but I'm sure there definitely will be interest. For me, I would like to see the person, if they're not based here, certainly maybe based in England, that they can go regularly to watch our players playing every week. I think most of our players are playing in England, but they should have a big presence here also. They're not responsible for developing the game here, but they should be seen around, and their profile should help with that as such. But yeah, I think it is an attractive position, and I think you'll get a lot of interest from abroad for that role.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things to wait for, obviously, who the next manager is going to be, but also, as you've said, the FAI will be expected to come out and speak in the next week or two, especially before this game against Northern Ireland. But Sue, thanks very much for your time today.
No problem at all, Raf.
All right, so that is former Republic of Ireland manager Sue Ronan speaking to us just about the situation with Vera Pauw and what comes next for the Republic of Ireland women's national team. But turning to other matters, the Women's Premier Division over the weekend on Saturday, Wexford beat Sligo 4-1 away. Shamrock Rovers were 4-0 winners at Cork City. Peamount won 3-0 at DLR Waves, and then Bows and Galway drew 0-0, and Shelburne beat Athlone 2-1. So top of the table at the moment, Peamount on 40, Shelburne on 34, Shamrock Rovers on 31, Bows on 27, and Galway 26, and Wexford with that victory up to 23 for the moment. And also the cup draw has also been made for the Sports Direct Women's FAI Cup quarterfinals. Shelburne going to be taking on DLR Waves, Bohemians against Sligo Rovers, Athlone Town are going to take on Peamount United, and then Shamrock Rovers are going to be at Cork City. And over on Friday, the SSC Electricity Men's Premier Division, some very intriguing results. Cork City beating Sligo Rovers 3-0, with Rory Keating scoring what was a very emotional hat-trick for him. And then Drogheda United beating UCD 3-0. Derry City 3-1 winners at Dundalk, with Will Patching scoring a couple of goals in that, including one from the spot. And then in the Dublin Derby, Shamrock Rovers winning 3-0 over Bohemians. And then a result that, of course, has a bearing on what's happening in terms of a potential title race. Shelburne denting St. Pat's hopes of the 2-1 win over the 10 men with Jay McGrath sent off at that stage. But first on the Dublin Derby, and Paul, I mean, results have been picking up for Shamrock Rovers of late, especially in the last, say, 2-3 weeks. And would it be fair to say this victory over Bohemians, this would be their best display in recent times?
Oh, by an absolute mile, Raf. I think, like you've mentioned there, the results have been good this year. The results and performances probably haven't gone hand in hand at different times. And yes, they've been good in spells during games, but I thought this was I wouldn't say the first time, but the most obvious time that they've put kind of 90 minutes together where they looked really strong. I thought in general play, they were very strong. The box that they had in midfield between Poom, O'Neill, Richie Towell and Graham Burke worked very well, and I thought Graham Burke was the best player on the pitch, to be honest with you. I thought his creativity, is just ability to control possession and create chances was very, very strong. And they played very well. No surprise to see Ronan and Finn kind of popping up at one. The fullbacks are so important to them when they play that system, and there was a control about their game that maybe has been lacking at times this season, and you could see kind of the confidence within the team, and it does go to show you that when they do put it together and when they do hit those levels, they are certainly quite a bit better than other teams in the league. And I would have said, I think on the podcast earlier on the year, that I would expect them to win by 10 plus points. That was probably looking a little out of touch a couple of weeks ago, but I think they're on course now to kind of win this at a canter. And when you have the likes of Neil Ferrugia coming off the bench and whipping one into the top bins, Jack Byrne not yet available, Dylan Watts didn't start the game the other night. Like, they've just so many options, and defensively as well, I think they looked solid. I thought Pico Lopez and Cleary and Grace looked very strong. Alan Mannis obviously back in goals, and it felt more of what we saw from Shamrock Rovers last year. And Bowes really didn't kind of lay a glove on them, and it's those fullback areas where you kind of expect Rovers to maybe be a little exposed, and you're kind of hoping from a Bowes point of view that Danny Grant or Dylan Connolly gets down in behind that back five in wide areas. Dylan Connolly did it once in the first half where he crossed into Afolabi, but they just weren't able to get anything going. I know a lot of people will talk about the penalty, and it was an absolute clear as day penalty. I couldn't believe that it was missed on James Clark, and that should have been given. But if you take that incident alone out, Shamrock Rovers were by far the better team, and it puts them in a superb position now heading into that Derry game when they play them, I think, in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, and Bows remain very much in the race for Europe despite that result. I mean, obviously they'll be gutted, but currently fourth place, 3 points behind Derry City, and also 3 points behind Pats. Now, Derry do have a game in hand, and no European distractions now, David. And I mean, they were 3-1 winners at Dundalk, and when you look at the momentum that they have, also, I suppose they took a bit of that from Europe as well, but probably best place to challenge Rovers, especially given what happened to Pats in their game.
Yeah, no, look, it does feel that way now, but this has been a strange season, I know, like, even Paul there speaking, and I was thinking the same just before the mid-season break when Rovers comfortably beat Bows. I think they maybe put 3 or 4 wins together at that point, and obviously that's going back a few months now. and they weren't able to kick on, you know. And like speaking to Stephen Bradley after, and I know it's going back on Rovers, but we'll obviously there's method to me madness here. I'm not just turning this into kind of a hoop scene section.
I trust you. I trust you.
Of the podcast, but if you go off what Rovers have done in the last few years, you would expect them now to kick on. But this season has just been a bit different. They've not been able to do that. Like you go back to the Shells game and you can see that so late they got that winner against obviously Dundalk. Pico Lopez got it, and Stephen Bradley felt as if he felt as if, you know what, the team now were in a really good place. And they've kind of been at that point a couple of times and not been able to do it. And I kind of feel as if that could still happen this season. I don't see Rovers at the moment, even though they look really, I was there, the match recovered it. I just don't see Rovers going on and doing it at the moment. And that's purely because of just how so far this season has gone. And because that like Derry game, Derry obviously have UCD on Wednesday, don't they? Like obviously you'd expect them to go there and win and win comfortably. Then there's going to be that break. And then you've got that game up in the Brandywell, and it's going to be brilliant. It's going to it could set the tone for the rest. I think that's the game where if Rovers can get away with there without getting beaten, well then I would say, well, you know what, they have all the experience, they have the know-how, and they've also dealt a bit of a blow to Derry as well. That's the game I think they still have to get through. I think that's still the challenge at the moment, that if they get through that, well then I would expect Rovers to go on and win the league. But I just have that sense in me, and I could be totally wrong. And listening to Stephen Bradley, he was talking about the psychologist that the Rovers players speak to once a week, and there's a lot of positive stuff that has come out of there. And obviously, he's the manager; he's going to want to be maintaining a high level of positivity at this stage of the season, and he's right, especially the manner of the win. But there's still so many fine margins, like Paul mentioned it there. That chance that Bowes had just before the half time, when eventually Lee Gray scored from that set piece. But Afolabi at the near post, like he gets there ahead of Dan Cleary and just doesn't get a connection. He's at the front post, he doesn't get the connection. And just the Afolabi of a couple of weeks ago was scoring that goal, and it was the one moment. But they're the moments you need in the game, especially when you're away to home. Such a good time where Bowles exposed, Sean Kavanagh down that side was a great little pass over the top for Dylan Conley, got in. But then they didn't take that chance, and then to give away that goal from the set piece, which was a fantastic header by Lee Grace. And then I'll be honest, I thought they could have easily had 3 penalties in the game. You know, like maybe the second one of the first half, he kind of falls inside the box, and it could have been given as a free kick. But even just before Ferrugia, when Ferrugia came on, Afolabi was getting treatment, and it looked to me as if he got, like, even in real time, he gets an elbow in the side of the head from Lee Grace when the ball's coming into the box. And like, you're looking at that and you're seeing it, and my instinct straight away was that's a penalty. Do you know what I mean? It's not a centre back just nudging you further, not the way you would normally, where you might get a little tap when the ball's in the air. Like, it wasn't just knocking him out of his stride. It looked to me as if it was a penalty. But that's the game now. I would say is, I think if Rovers can get away from the Brandywell in a couple of weeks' time, it's a shame actually it's not this week as well, because just with the momentum maybe both sides has, they go 100 miles an hour. You wonder, will a bit of the intensity be going out of it, especially with what could be at stake, because it's a game I think Derry have to win. That maybe that will play into Rovers' hands. They've already, you go back to earlier in the season, they scored one of the goals of the season there earlier in the season. It wasn't Richie Tell scored that fantastic goal, and it was a move that was created like back to front. And again, Paul mentioned that box midfield, utilised it to absolutely unbelievable effect, because Jack Bourne obviously played then, and he Stephen Bradley mentioned it, he's probably going to be back by the time that Derry game comes around as well. So I think that's the game. That's going to be the one that could decide it. Because if Derry can, I think Derry will, if they could get back to 1 point, win that if by then, and then it's anybody's. It really is. And I do think now it is just going to be Derry and Rovers in a race for it, and the rest are playing for Europe and maybe trying to do something in the cup.
Yeah, and Derry kept themselves in it obviously by making the most of Dundalk's defensive errors in their game. Obviously ended up being 3-1, but Dundalk as well did test Maher at the other end. He had to make a couple of good saves in the game, but the end result of the weekend, of course, the Shells actually go above Dundalk now and are in the mix for Europe at Pats' expense. Pats still ahead of them, of course. Pats on 50 points and Shells back in fifth on 46. But that game, Paul, I mean, it hinged on obviously a red card for Jay McGrath at a point that Pats were winning 1-0, and then Euclides then with Euclides Cabral then with the equaliser for Shells, and then Paddy Barrett with a brilliant header to win it for Shells.
Never mind the game. What about Damien Duff at the end of it? It was brilliant, but it was an interesting fixture. I mean, for me, Jack Moylan has been Shell's standout player this season, and he tied McGrath up once or twice even before the second yellow, whereby he's just chopped him in the box, and he's such a difficult player to play against. Raf, he's got kind of a unique talent of being able to dribble with the ball very, very well, and he's got his back to goal when he's got McGrath, but he's just rolled him. And he's put him in a real sticky position where McGrath's had to take him down, and Shell's kicked on from there. But Shell's, irrespective of who they're playing, are always within games. They never seem to get steamrolled or never seems to concede too many goals. And they've got players who can hurt you in the likes of Moylan. But yeah, the header from Paddy Barrett was superb. I mean, he must be 12 yards out when he's made contact with the ball. And maybe you could ask a bit more of Breslin on the post to maybe get up and clear it, but it was one that kind of landed right in the top corner, and it leaves them in an incredible position. I mean, you talk about the progression and development of football clubs, and you kind of look to put building blocks in place and progress year on year, and you can absolutely say that about Shells. I think, where they are in the league table is a testament to that, but I think the performances as well, they have been a difficult side to play against, but they're certainly showing a lot more on the ball in the last couple of months. And you look at Bows there, and there's only a point between them. Bows haven't won away from home, Raf, since April. And that would be a big worry for me if I was a Bows fan, that, yes, they're good at Dalymount Park, but anytime they go away, they seem to be struggling to win games and pick up points. And as long as Shells can kind of stay on kind of their coach threads, they could well catch them. They've shown that they're very difficult to play against, very difficult to beat. And there's a belief within that squad that they can go one better last year. And if one of the teams is to win the cup and opens up European football for that fourth spot, I would not be surprised if Shells were to leapfrog Bows. Bows obviously in control at the moment, but if they were to slip up, Shells are right behind them.
Yeah, it's a similar story at the other end of the table with a huge win for Cork City, a hat-trick for Rory Keaton, as I said, quite an emotional one for him, given what himself and his family have had to go through in recent times. So 3-0 win, which leaves Sligo also having worries growing week by week. That's 4 league defeats in a row for Sligo without a goal as well, if you ignore the FAI Cup, where they beat Treaty United there recently, and no league win since mid-July when they had beaten Cork 3-0 in the corresponding fixture. And Paul, I mean, Sligo had probably the better of the game when you look at the chances up until the sloppy penalty that's given away by the goalkeeper.
Yeah, I feel for Conor Walsh. Like, he's a young man. He's probably got his opportunity a little sooner than he was expected at Sligo. And it was a really heavy touch. I'm sure when he looks back on it now, it's clear as day that he should have just taken a swing of it and just put it into row Z and kind of set up again from there. But he's taken a heavy touch, and then he's kind of compounded things by giving away the penalty. But I think by and large, when you look at Sligo, the real worry for me, Raf, is just the nature of the goals they're giving away. Like, if you look at Keating's, I think it's second from a throw-in. I think it's maybe John Mahon that he just a little drop of the shoulder, a throw, and he's in one-on-one against Conor Walsh. So that's a real worry. I thought early on in the season some of the performances were quite strong, but now it looks like they're just a really easy team to play against, an easy team to score against. When they lost Max Mata, a lot of those goals will have dried up. You start to worry for them at both ends, and they're losing a hell of a lot of games. So it's a situation there where Sligo desperately need to get back to basics very quickly, and they need to share up, because at the moment they're leaking goals and they're losing games of football. And Cork, particularly with Keating back and Keating scoring goals, are kind of gives themselves more chances of picking up points in games. And only 3 points behind, you're kind of looking at a situation where if you're picking one team to avoid that playoff, you're probably picking Cork at this moment in time. And that's not a situation that many people would have foreseen, maybe 4 or 6 weeks ago, where it looked like there was a good bit of daylight between the two teams. Sligo were in free fall. Like, there's no way of getting away from that. They are in free fall. And something needs to change quickly, because that habit of losing games is a terrible one to be in. And there's no evidence there. Purely when you look at the goals that they concede, like Cork have done well in different games, but Cork aren't one of the top teams in this division. And you look at the goals that they conceded the other day, and that would ring alarm bells in my ears if I was a Sligo fan. And Sligo, when I was playing, Sligo and Derry were the two teams that you used to envy or you used to hate playing against, because it was such a difficult place to go and such a difficult team to play against. There's no sign of that within that squad, and I'd be very worried for them.
Yeah, Andrade United, I suppose, finally in the Premier Division, David. I mean, they're 8 points clear. Cork probably another couple of wins, and they should be they'll definitely have themselves over the line. But I think apart from the fact that they're put themselves in a great position to survive with a bit to spare. Kyle Robinson's goal, his second of the day. I mean, arguably goal of the season.
Yeah, well, I think I'm not sure who was on commentary, but it was called straight away, wasn't it? Like, it was one of those where, again, coming back, and there was a couple of messages thrown into WhatsApp, and it was like, just what a goal, what a goal, what a goal. And it was only when I got home that you had a look to watch it, and it's just fantastic. And like, on a couple of points, and kind of following on from what Paul was saying about Sligo, and it's one of them where, like, like Drogheda, it's almost like Drogheda are made for this kind of situation. Like, they've got themselves clear. They've had a good start to the season. Like, even when they had Freddie Draper and he was still there, like, they had him like leading the line. But they've just shown themselves to be a bit cuter and a bit smarter about how they go about it. And don't get me wrong, of course, like, it helps their home ground as well. Is a place where teams, you put it in the cliche, tough place to go, not a nice place to go. Whereas with Sligo, like, after the break, I was just double checking there, wanted to see, like, they have UCD at home, like, they have to win that game for Sligo Rovers, because after that they've got Derry, they've got Bows, they've got Pats. They're not getting a point out of those games. I don't think, like, especially because Bows are at home. And I'll be honest, until Paul flagged it there, I actually wasn't even aware of the extent of Bows' troubles on the road as well. So the fact that Bows are going to be at home, you can't see Sligo getting that in there. And then just with Drogheda, yeah, like, they're just like them and UCD are the outliers a little bit, because, like, Drogheda really are the one true kind of part-time team left in the league. Do you know, like, I did a piece about this at the start of the season about where the league is going. The likes of Drogheda are gonna be slowly extinguished from the league in terms of how they want it. It's going to be obviously a full-time professional league. The nature of it with the underage systems coming up, it's going to be younger players and all the rest. And I was expecting maybe Drogheda to have a bit of a struggle, but obviously some of the deals they got over it and got in were massive for them. They obviously lost, and the name has just totally gone out of my head. The fullback was obviously gone to Norwich as well. But, like, they just seem to have been able to deal with some of these bumps in the road a bit quicker and a bit easier, and just obviously coming from the management too as well, but just how they've been set up. And, like, Darren Markey as well, like, he's one of those players who obviously came through at Pats and done really well, but then with Drogheda, he's really taken on that responsibility as well. And I was looking at one of the stats with Shane Keegan, obviously the Cove Ramblers manager, but I think Darren Markey is like fourth in the stats for actually carrying the ball in terms of the distance he's carried it, and just like, and stuff like that. I know it could be sometimes like that, but that just gives you an insight as well into just little things where there's moments where you have those players who can just relieve that little bit of pressure and take a bit of, kind of, pressure off, and just ease a little bit of, the anxiety that can be around the crowd when you have a player like him who you forget he's been around now a little bit. You don't kind of view him as that kind of experienced or just a kind of a head who you'd look to. Before, he was that player who can you unlock a defence with a pass? Can he do something? But he's actually had that leadership role, I think, at Drogheda, and taken it on really well. And I think that's something, if you're being really harsh about it, at Sligo, that just hasn't been there. Just that little bit of know-how and just that bit of people taking proper responsibility for what's being needed on the pitch.
Yeah, and in the first division, Athlone Town were 2-1 winners at Waterford. Wexford and Finn Harp shared the points 1-1, and then Cove Ramblers beat Treaty United 1-0, and Bray Wanderers were 3-1 winners at Kerry. And then Saturday night, Longford Town beat Galway United 1-0, but really doesn't really do much to the table. Galway still top, 73 points, Waterford 58, and then Cove, Athlone and Wexford on 45, 43, 39, and Longford Town occupying the sixth place position there on 37. But before we go, the Champions League draw for the group stage was made last week, and looking through it, I mean, we're going to have live coverage on Tuesday nights on RT2 and the RT Player, so people will be able to watch it there. But Newcastle's draw, probably, Paul, is the one that on paper looks pretty tough. I mean, they're in with PSG, they're in with Borussia Dortmund, AC Milan, but maybe on paper it's not as or when you go beyond paper, it doesn't look as bad actually when you look at it, or they should be able to compete anyway.
Yeah, they'll absolutely compete, but yeah, it's the one group that's kind of wide open with regards to the teams that will go through. You would expect that Paris Saint-Germain would likely top the group with kind of the players that they have at their disposal, like Luis Enrique as a manager as well. It's going to be difficult for Newcastle, Raf. Like, you look at those teams and they're very tried and tested within European football. They've bundles of experience of managing kind of domestic league and then kind of the midweek European games. And I'm not sure that's something that you would see a huge amount of within that Newcastle team. And that's probably the worry that I would have for Newcastle, is that, you know, there's not a huge amount of experience and know-how of managing these European ties. And they could find it difficult, I think, to get out of that group, particularly just with the teams that they're going to have to go up against. But it'll be an interesting one. Like, they haven't started the Premier League very well. They've had very difficult games to play, so you can maybe give them a bit of a pass there, but they certainly don't seem to be hitting the levels that they were showing last year. I thought they overachieved within the Premier League, and I thought this year it was going to be difficult to repeat that again. But that Champions League group is going to be difficult, and it'll also be interesting to see how they actually balance that with the results they get in the Premier League when they have to play midweek against some of these teams. What sort of results they get in the Premier League, and whether or not that impacts them there. But if I was kind of giving you a bit of a guess, I don't think they'll get out of that group. I think it's going to be too stern a task to get out of it. But there's certainly other groups as well. I know Davey be interested with Manchester United. I think Manchester United could struggle to get out of that group as well.
Yeah, because looking at it, City, they've Leipzig, they have Red Star Belgrade, and Young Boys. You'd be fairly confident that they'll walk that, if not winning every game. Obviously, Leipzig are the toughest team in that group. And then you look at Arsenal, they've got Sevilla, who seem to be, this isn't the Europa League, so they're bottom of La Liga at the moment as well, so they're not as big a challenge. They have PSV as well, who did well to trash Rangers in the playoff, and then Lens as well from France. But David, I mean, looking at Man United's group, obviously Bayern Munich now with Harry Kane leading the line, and then Copenhagen, who were pretty strong at home in the group stages last year, and then Galatasaray, who I saw a little bit of in the playoff, because they were live on RT2 last Tuesday. It's a tricky enough group for United, and we did see them against Arsenal yesterday, where, you know, they made a game of it until the closing stages, when a certain Declan Rice with a deflected goal, in fairness, opened things up, and then Gabriel Jesus with the clincher.
Yeah, so just on the group, like, let's be honest, like, Bayern Munich will top the group. That's just what they do, isn't it? They just don't mess about. They get through the group stages. They just go through and pummel teams. And I know, like, there seem to be a little bit of a case of under with Tuchel in terms of even how they won the league, like the nature of it and stuff. And maybe if you're trying to be really overly optimistic, maybe they might not have that same, I don't know, aura of invincibility, because of some of maybe that sense of things are changing a little bit under Tuchel. But like, they've got the pedigree, United don't at the moment, in terms of over the last couple of years, and the players. You look at their squad, and obviously Harry Kane coming into it as well. Like, you would expect them to comfortably top that group, partly because just you said there about United, but like United so far this season, it's been a kind of carry on from last year, in terms of they've had moments and they've had little spells in games where you have to say, yeah, you know what, they look like a team, but they just have that still underlying vulnerability where moments can go against them and they can't overcome it. And just on the back of, say, the match with Arsenal, like, it's a strange one, because like, they are just a toenail away, I suppose, or from Garnacho of actually possibly winning that game, and possibly people saying, well, do you know what, tactics and all the rest of it was played a blind, or where they just had an awful lot of control in the game by just using the ball very blandly and not really doing much with it, but being capable of doing it, which is what United teams of the last few years before weren't really able to do. What United did, where they kind of seemed to draw Arsenal onto them a little bit, and seemed to want Arsenal to come at them and then be able to try and pick a pass. And then, even though their first goal from Rashford came from a mistake, it kind of just shows you what Ten Hag wants to do. So you can kind of see a template there, where it's almost as if United now are going to try and begin to, especially made more so in the bigger games, and maybe they might try and do it against Bayern Munich, depending on what players are back by the time that is, because obviously the injuries as well have decimated them a little bit. But it almost feels like in the big games now, Ten Hag wants to have that capability to almost bar teams into submission a small bit in terms of how they use the ball, and then try and pick a pass around them and do something on the counter, or do something quick. And if you're looking at it from a United point of view, yesterday, it almost worked to an absolute T. And the margins, we mentioned it about the balls in the Rovers game, but the margins are just so small. If you look back that moment with Garnetto's goal and Casemiro being so much more front-footed at that stage than even Declan Rice. If you go back and look at it, like people would have been looking, Declan Rice caught out, Casemiro was supposed to be the one who was on his last legs, and yet he was the one who actually was driving forward and had Rice spinning at that moment. He's nowhere to be seen as a defensive midfielder. Yet a couple of moments later, Rice is able to regain that composure at the back post where United hadn't been marking in the game. Gabriel does a great job blocking on Johnny Evans, and they get the goal and then they win the game. And that's kind of reinforces as well if you look at it again, because the victors always write the history books. That just shows where Arsenal are at as well, where they can actually overcome that kind of bit of a scare. They got a bit fortunate with Garnetto's goal and it was offside, but have that capability to not let that shake them and let United get back on top. They actually were able to go on and win the game, and I think if you're talking about it with it in terms of the Champions League, I think that's where I think what Arsenal will get through the group. I think their home form obviously is exceptional as well. Other than obviously the drop points at Fulham, I think they should go through that group, not a problem, because I just think they have the capability, unlike United, to be able to just ease past in those kind of games. Whereas it kind of still feels with United sometimes, a lot of the time, it can be a bit of a struggle. And I think the first game for United is Bayern Munich as well, isn't it? In the group, the first game of the group, I'm almost sure it is Bayern Munich. And if you lose the first game, obviously you're up against it then as well. And if you wouldn't think United could go to, say, Copenhagen and hang your hat on getting a result, especially you wouldn't do it in Galatasaray. And at the moment, despite the fact that they were so impressive at home last year, especially in the league in terms of the results, and even the game against Barcelona in the Europa League, they were able to turn it on in Europe at times at home. That's what's going to get them through this group, if they're able to try and nick a couple of points away from home, and that might be enough to get them second place. That's pretty much what they're aiming for.
Yeah, and all that will be to come, obviously, after the international break. And of course, as well, this Champions League group stage is the last of this type of group stage, because UEFA are going with the Swiss model from next season. And obviously, this is to have more games and consequently bigger bank balance as well, I would imagine, is a big motivation for that. But anyway, in the meantime, I'll be back on Friday with a bonus episode with a view from the Netherlands with Bart Vlietstra, which will touch on Sunday's game as well. As I said, Troy Parrott, Excelsior, and then Vera Pauw, and the sort of reaction in our homeland to what's happened over here. And then on Monday, we'll be reviewing Ireland's international window, among other things. And of course, all the games against France and the Netherlands are going to be live on RT2, RT Player, and will be on RT Radio as well. The France game on 2FM's Game On, and then of course live blogs, updates and reaction on rt.ie/sport. But David Sneyd, thanks very much for taking the time, and Paul Corry.
Cheers, Raf.